Okay, good evening, everybody. This is episode 331 of the John 1911 podcast, and according to my records, it has been close to 2 weeks since we have done an episode, and that is my fault. I accept full responsibility. Unfortunately, we've had some delays with all the construction going on at the John 1911 range that have taken me away from the dear listener and this cherished institution of the John 1911 podcast. Yeah, I'm laying it on thick. So I apologize for that. As I have promised, the goal of a lot of these upgrades will be so that we can do more content, more podcasts, more shooting of the reference collection, maybe even having staff members coming in, maybe joint videos. We've had some interest from some groups wanting to come in and maybe collaborate on some things, and we might be more open to it now that we have some facilities to support that. So anyway, it's been a lot, so I might as well talk to you about what's been going on with that. So I guess it's been a while since I've actually talked about it on pod. So the building is framed, and we have Amish people that are building this building, and I don't know what you guys see on television, or these Amish guys that come through and they throw up a barn in like a day. Well, this is essentially a commercial building that looks like a barn, and it's all this poured stuff. So anyway, we have the roof on it, we have the siding on, I'd say 95% of the building. I was informed yesterday that the vendor that's supposed to provide us with the windows, those are running a few days behind, so the Amish guys are not putting in the metal siding around where these windows are supposed to be. I guess they fit it around it. They don't install the metal then cut it. They install it all together, so they're leaving some of that. But if you were to see it from the road, the building is essentially standing. You definitely get a size. You get a reference or an appreciation for how large this building is relative to, it was in this field and there was nothing there. So it kind of dominates, the neighborhood a little bit, but that's kind of what we're going for. It is a black building, so that certainly sticks out. Like old Henry Ford said, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. So got the roof, got the siding. We don't have the windows, and we don't have this. There's some doors. We had to have some custom doors ordered for various reasons, that it's not even worth going into. Some of the issues that we're having now are the utilities. Had a shock as to what the entity that does the electric, what they want to charge us for trenching all the way to the building, because I don't want them to put telephone poles up. That's just ridiculous. So, then they have to burrow under a street, and, they've got the contract, and it's kind of a monopoly because it's government, pseudo government. And so, there's been some growling back and forth on some of that, and we're trying to work some of that out. The alternatives they're giving me don't do anything that I would meet our security standards for insurance. So any of you that work in power would know what I'm talking about, and those of you that don't, I'm not going to explain it to you. So it's been fun and interesting. It was interesting because it was a new experience for. How do I say this story? The crew that is building this building, they're Amish. And it's amazing what they can and can't do. And I think it changes from area to area, but they don't drive cars, but they can drive tractors. They own tractors. They can drive bobcats, skid steers, but they can't drive cars. They've got basically a telehandler that they're using, that they drive that to work up on the roof and do all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that in this group is, in essence, is it's one family. It's the patriarch of the family and his. Well, I know he's got more kids in this, but it's at least 5 sons that he has working on our building. So, and yeah, I'd say the oldest is maybe 22. Could be in his early 20s. And while they're Amish, in essence, they're still young American boys, and so they have a lot of questions, because they know who we are, and there's a gun range, and there's cops around, and there's weapons, and just all this infrastructure, and it's not like any other job they've ever done. So they try to broach some questions, but so one day, it was earlier this week, I was on the rifle range, and they were there, and they were not working on the roof or anything, so they were kind of down low. So, and I wasn't shooting in their direction, but I try not to bang these guys too hard with guns. I've really had to pull back a lot of the shooting and the training when people are on property, because it's not just the Amish guys who know. If they have vendors coming in, truck drivers coming in, dropping off stuff, this random gunfire, people are not really expecting it, because you can't tell that this is a gun range from the road. So anyway, this one day, I had to go out there and do something. I'm talking to him like, hey, they're inside. I'm like, hey, I'm going to be out on the rifle range. I got to check some zeros on some guns. And, didn't think a whole lot of it. And at the I guess it's the 115-yard shooting position, the covered shooting position, what we call the picnic shelter. Our regulars will know what that is. And I'm sitting at a bench, and I'm loading up an AR. It's the suppressed, AR-15 Gemtech thing, and just checking some zero with some 55 grain PMC ammo. And I'm shooting the gun. It's working great. Zero seems to be on with this ammo. Took it out to 300, bringing it back into like 50, hitting this little thing. Then it's get off the bench. Then I'm doing some standing shooting at 100, 200, and then going back down to the 50. And then I decide to go to the PRS barricade, and I'm working the different positions with the barricade. I'm kind of getting warmed up, and I'm shooting some different positions in the barricade, left-handed, offhand, or weak hand, and doing some reloads, and just kind of blowing the dust off of it. And I just had this feeling that I wasn't alone, and I just turned around and peeked over my shoulder, and there's 5 little heads peeking up over the berm watching me shoot, and it's and you just kind of realize, I think the boys need some trigger time. So I made it a point later in the week. We had a meeting about the Coyote door. And those of you, the Coyote door is, we're on the second story of this building. We put in a little attic, and we're putting in and it's a temperature controlled building. And we're putting in on the second story this little hatch that it's sealed with the weather, but we can open it up, and we can sit up there with some benches and some tables and a little bit of infrastructure, and we can be actually, if I want, because it's climate controlled, and we can sit up there and basically hunt the rifle range, call in coyotes, and still be in the building. And the building peaks up over the top of the pit. So the building looks down over the pit and looks down all across the rifle range. So from this perch at the Coyote door, you can see easily 600 yards, but you can shoot easily 400 you could maybe get 5 if I knock down some trees, but I don't know if I'm going to do that yet. But it's a place to sit and do all this. So, but, they had some specific questions. They were like, well, how high do you want this Coyote door or this little open window thing? And so I was like, well, this is a good opportunity to pull out the rifle and show them various shooting positions. And also we had to talk about, different types of guns. So we're shooting, think of this kind of like if you would imagine shooting out of a gun port on a tank or an armored vehicle. So while it's not that small, like I think the Coyote door is 36 inches wide, or maybe it's 40 some inches wide. Then it's 16 inches tall. And so what we're doing is it's got a sill, And so I can throw tack rifles on it, AR-15s, FNCs, that kind of thing. But then also, I wanted it high enough that if I do put a bench up there and, somebody can push, they can, push forward with a bipod and they're below the sill a little bit, say like 2 inches, so they can load a bipod, or if they want to put a bag, a large bag, I don't want it so they could easily have the bag push out of the Coyote door and fall, down to the ground. That would just suck rocks. So, we kind of had to work out some of this. They know how to build stuff and I know how to shoot stuff, and we had to sit with a dry gun in a chair and kind of figure out the heights and measure. And so, again, they're boys, and it was a good opportunity to show them a fancy AR and show them a suppressor. I believe some of them were familiar with red dots, but they'd never really seen a red dot before, and so they got to see that. Also, I think what was most interesting to them was on this particular rifle, there's an aim point magnifier. Remember those old magnifiers that Aim Point came out with they were 6 power, and you can flip them off to the side, but also twist them off to the gun. So, so you can have 0 power red dot, or, flip it over to 6 power. And so they were realizing that even though you got this little tack rifle 5.56 gun, I mean, you can take precision shots out pretty far with this thing. So, that was just fun, and kind of I let each boy kind of play with the gun and work the trigger, and, answered questions. And I promised them, I said, when the job is done, that, we'll have a day and I'll pull out a bunch of ammo and, let them all shoot some guns and, kind of figure it out. And I do know, like, their dad, when he had come to the property, he was one of multiple people that had come to bid on the job, and not the only Amish person. I liked him so much, we started shooting. And so he got to shoot this particular gun with the suppressor. And I know he told all the boys about it. And so, it was just kind of, letting the boys have a little fun and, kind of just remember what it was like to be 20 and to be around people that have all these fancy guns and be like, man, it'd be nice to have those kinds of guns. So it was just, there's probably no real point to the story other than me just, kind of feeling good about, maybe instructing some young men on, stuff that they want to do. And, I enjoy doing it. So that's been one of the things that we've been doing while we've been delayed. But enough with that. So we had another issue, I guess, that kind of developed, and I think it only affected me. It was with the John 1911 newsletter. It was kind of frustrating. Was we had an issue delivering the newsletter on, I guess it was Tuesday of this week, to possibly to some people that use Apple. That use Apple as a domain name for a website, which is pretty small, thing. So it looked like, but you got to realize, technical wise, the percentage of you that consume our media or follow our content that use Apple products is pretty high. And it's not unique to the John 1911 community. That's pretty much the standard across the market, not just with cell phones, but with podcasts. Like, I think fully 70% of folks who consume this podcast do so on some kind of Apple device. The reality is, if you're running an Apple device, you're more likely to listen to podcasts than you are if you don't. So, if we have an issue delivering to Apple people, that immediately, gets my ears up. And so we've never had this issue before. And it turned out it was not us. It was a small glitch with Apple. And again, most of you in the world would have never noticed it, but we just happened to push out a newsletter right when this glitch happened with Apple on their back end. And so if you did not get a newsletter from us on Tuesday, that is why. So it's not like it went to your junk folder. It literally just didn't land to you. And so hopefully you'll get the newsletter on Saturday morning at 7 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And, if you're curious what's going on. And if for some reason you haven't been getting a newsletter and you've signed up, feel free to sign up again. It will let you sign up as long as if you're not on the list, it'll add you. If you're on the list, it will, it'll let you know, and, we'll see it. And, our, the service that we use that provides our email newsletter, we're a pretty big client for them. So they give us some, extra service on, that kind of stuff. So it's, we'll get it all figured out in case you're having problems with that. That was a Harley that just went by. So welcome to my life. Couple things here. I've been just kind of industry news and just some things I thought was interesting and I wanted to cover. The first one, I guess, is kind of personal business. We have been buying some Lancer magazines to, use them, for various projects and for videos and that kind of stuff for tack rifles. And to be honest, the main motivation for buying these Lancer magazines is because of the colors. We've been getting them, I think, almost 90% of them from AIM Surplus. AIM is local to us. We are in Cincinnati, and AIM is in Cincinnati. And, like if they blow out some goofy color, we tend to buy some, like we've got purple mags and maybe some red mags, and I don't even some smoke clear mags or whatever. So, and I'm saying all that to say this. I recently has come to my attention by accident. Is there a problem with Lancer magazines failing that I'm not that I would be aware of it, because I thought these mags were considered good to go, but I'm hearing grumblings how maybe some people are having issues where maybe if they're taking the mag and they're hitting their magazine maybe on a barricade or something, it might be pulling a magazine apart. Do I have that right? Do I understand this problem correctly? I don't know. If you've got information to school me on this, and also, do I need to stop buying these magazines? I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of magazines, and I just started buying the Lancer ones really for the color, just because we could differentiate, different things. And, and frankly, when you're running and gunning, depending on where you're at, having those bright color magazines on the ground, they're easier to find, especially in the grass. So, do I need to stop buying those? Let me know. In other news that I thought was a little disappointing, and I hope it doesn't portend any problems like that happened with the original Hudson H9, the Daniel Defense H9 guns, that I've seen more than one reference to people getting the guns and the 9mm rounds are keyholing. And what's really interesting is the keyholing is happening at pretty close ranges. And that tells me something. I don't know a whole lot about Daniel Defense or Marty Daniel, not that I would. I'm kind of a BCM guy. I mean, I'm not really any kind of AR guy. I've got the few that I've got, but I don't really swim in those waters. It's as long as your gun runs, I'm happy. So, but apparently, seemingly, I'm surmising this, I don't know this, that the H9 magazines, or the Daniel H9 magazines, or the Daniel H9 barrels might be a little bit out of spec. And it's probably because Daniel Defense has never made a handgun before, so they're probably not making their own barrels. I assume they make their own AR barrels, but maybe they don't. They could farm it out or OEM it. And, maybe one of their vendors, the lands and grooves on these barrels is a little out of spec, and these 9mm round. This one dude was showing 9mm rounds keyholing. I mean, I think like 12 yards, and it's like, holy cow, like that's pretty bad. So I'm hoping. The good news is I believe Daniel Defense is a large company, so if there's a problem, not that I want to spend somebody else's money. It's easy for the consumer to be like, oh, they can eat it. The good news is I would think Daniel Defense is big enough that if they have to eat something, they can't. It's not like if there's a barrel problem with some of these guns, it's going to put them out of business like it basically did Hudson. Hudson got into a situation where they were having issues with their gun running, or, and parts breakages, but then they were getting into a problem where they had a sole source contract relationship with an outside vendor, and if something was out of spec, they were kind of fucked, because they had, they just had to remake them all, and there'd be some big debate or some big fight, or we're not paying you for these are out of spec, or these aren't working. And in the meantime, when they're having these arguments and trying to negotiate this, they don't have any parts to build any goddamn guns. So don't freak out, H9 fans. I'm sure hopefully it's just a small number of these H9 guns, but something worth keeping an eye on. And if you go to pick one up at the gun store, maybe it's worth taking a 9mm bullet and putting it into Crown. I don't know if that would detect a problem with a barrel. I'm not even certain what the issue is, but it's something to consider when you're buying one of these guns. And we eventually will pick one up for the reference collection because it is interesting. Another issue that came up is, and Kraken had published this on the website, he out where he's in Nebraska, gun store out where he lives, they had these PSA Daggers, which is basically their Gen 3 Glock clones, right? And he had a picture. It's a good side pusher, and it had been oiled. And they're trying to change. This gunsmith is trying to change the sights on this PSA gun, and the rails end up splitting on the slide. And it's like, I've seen that before, but I haven't seen it in a while. But it's just kind of one of those things where, I like Glocks, and I know I'm a 1911 guy, and I really am, but I've never met a true shooter. Let me put it this way. A 1911 person who is rabidly anti-Glock, I have yet to meet one of these 1911 people that is rabidly anti-Glock that could shoot their way out of a wet paper bag. Dudes that get wrapped around the axle with jersey waving like it's the 49ers versus the Kansas City Chiefs at the Super Bowl. Those are dudes who are spending time in the stands wearing a t-shirt, not putting the work in on the field. And, I'm saying that to say this. If you're inclined to buy, for me personally, I don't know why you would buy a PSA Glock clone. I don't know. I mean, it's not like Glocks are expensive or they're hard to get. I mean, like, you can get Gen 3, Gen 4 police trading guns anywhere. I mean, I don't understand why you'd buy this gun. I mean, I'm not saying PSA can't sell it. I'm not even saying PSA, shouldn't sell it. I mean, they're obviously selling a ton of they's guns, and PSA is using this as a way to, fund other projects that I find interesting. But if you were somebody that I care about, or you belong to me or mine, and you show up on one of these PSA guns, I'd be like, I'd give it a little bit of side eye, as long as it's running fine. If you're on my team, or you're in my life, or you're someone I care about, and you're happy and everything's fine. But the second that gun starts giving trouble, I'm taking that gun away from you, and I'm giving you a Glock. Like, take a Glock. Here's a brown one. You can have a special one. Here's a Glock. And it's just, I mean, like, I don't know. Like, you can get, I mean, even if you want a gun just to fuck around with, buy a Glock 40 that nobody wants and put a 9mm conversion barrel in it. And you're like, well, I would never carry that on the street. I don't know if that'd be 100% reliable. I don't disagree with you. But if you're buying a gun to fuck around with anyway, buy one of these 40 caliber Glocks and convert it. I've thought about doing it. And so, I guess we published the cracked rail or the split rail on the PSA gun because I thought it was worth sharing, because I know there's a lot of you folks out there that are interested in these cheap guns, and there certainly is a place for cheap guns. But, I'm also not going to lose any sleep at night over, PSA trying to, gee, I hope all these slides are somehow right, or these slides are in spec, or I hope these slides are hard enough, or maybe they're not too hard and brittle. I don't know what the problem would be. I personally would worry way more about the Daniel Defense H9 gun barrels than I would about the PSA Dagger guns. Okay, confession time here. We had purchased, it'd been on our long-term to-buy list, one of these 22 Magnum J-frame revolvers. A Smith & Wesson 351C in particular is the gun, and we had seen one come through Shooter Supply used, and, you know, while we wouldn't buy one new, we would certainly buy one used, and we did. And I've had it for a while, and obviously with all the construction and everything, and we're just having a hard time keeping all the gun projects going. So one of those days, the Amish had cut out at like 3 o'clock. I intentionally brought the 351 with me and some 22. I've been keeping some 22 Magnum ammo in the truck. And, you know, I took it out there and I shot a little bit with the gun. And I have to admit, it was pretty fun. Like, I mean, these little J-frame pocket, I don't like pocket rocket guns. This is turning kind of a negative podcast. I don't mean it this way. Like, I don't like this, I don't like that. But I mean, it's been a known thing, like the running joke. I've said it a million times. Why don't I own a J-frame revolver? Because I would fucking carry it. And so, you know, it's just never been a gun. Once you're shooting them, I've never been really interested in, because I'm not interested in shooting that gun enough to become as proficient with it as I would want to be. So, and also, I used to do this as a joke a long time ago. We would get these 45 guys, these 1911 guys, and they would complain about how weak 9mm was. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. You know, and we had one of these, we still have it, obviously. It's a J-frame revolver. It's a Smith & Wesson 940-1. I'm surprised I remember that. And it is an all-steel little J-frame revolver, and it's chambered in 9mm parabellum, 9x19. It uses moon clips, and it's steel, so it's kind of heavy. And when you shoot that gun, I'm not saying it's 357 Magnum. It's not, but it's got some sting to it, and you don't want to shoot that gun all day. And so I used to have 45 caliber 1911 guys shoot that gun just to kind of be like, this is 9mm, you know, just so you're aware, this is 9mm. This is more than 38. Okay. You know, this is not nothing. And so these little pocket rocket guns, I love the form factor and I love the idea of a backup, a bug gun, but I just never, I don't want to shoot them enough. Like, I don't want to end up like, I'm going to say this, like, this is terrible. I don't mean this the way this, and there's no way this man is listening to this podcast. And if he is, I please don't take this the wrong way. But if you look at Masad Ayoub's hands, you know, I feel like if I shot 38 special or 38 plus P of 357 J-frame revolvers every day, you know, for the next 10 years, my hand, I would end up with, you know, very arthritic hands. And, you know, maybe I will anyway, but I figure it's like, you know, don't tempt fate. So anyway, got one of these 22 Win Mag guns. And, you know, I don't know how powerful 22 Win Mag is in real life. I recognize as a ground fighting gun or a pig pile gun, like a contact shot. Like if I'm rolling around on the ground with someone and I pull that gun out and I push it up against that guy's body, not only is he eating a 22 Magnum, he's eating all that gas, which is devastating. But the idea, it's like, that gun was so nice to shoot. It's making me kind of 32 Smith & Wesson? There's some 32 caliber J frames that I'm curious about, and not the 327 Magnum. I don't know what that thing kicks like. I don't know if that's hard or not, but maybe these 32s, because there's like the 32 Smith & Wesson, there's 32 short, and then there's 32 H&R, Magnum or 32 H&R. Then there's the Big Mammer Jammer, which is 327 Federal, I think. I think that's what it's called. And I'm not certain, but some of these J-frame revolvers might be able to shoot at least 3 of these calibers, if not 4. And it's like, man, that's almost like having a 22 Magnum shoot a 22 long rifle, or, 38 357. It's like, that's pretty interesting. And I'm curious what a 32 caliber J-frame gun would feel like to shoot it. And could you shoot it for a couple hours and really practice and do some stuff and have different ammo loadings? Maybe you've got your target loads or your practice ammo, then maybe you want to go to your more powerful 32 H&R or 327 Federal, but it still isn't trying to beat you to death like 357 or these heavy 38s in these guns. Anyway, I'm becoming J-frame curious, and so I don't know how many of y'all are J-frame curious. I'm a 1911 guy. I love full-size guns, but there is something about J-frames, and I've always liked revolvers. And so as soon as we can run across one of these Smith & Wesson 32 caliber J-frame guns that they're coming out with, or they're going to be re-releasing, we'll pick one up. However, we're probably not going to pay full boat for one. We're going to pick one up used somewhere. That's kind of how we buy a lot of this stuff. And so, it might be a while. Listener question. Someone wanted to know, what do I think of the Glock 49? And I had to look that up. What's a Glock 49? And apparently it is a Glock 19 frame with a 17 slide. And if that is true, I hate it. I've got large-ish hands. The Glock 19 frame is too small for me. My favorite Glock ever made is, I prefer the Glock 17, but I think the best Glock is the Glock 45, which is the 17 frame and the 19 slide. So the exact opposite of this Glock 49. I'd rather have the longer grip frame and the shorter slide than whatever it is you're trying to describe. So again, if you want to get one, that's great. You didn't want me to use your name, but it's not a gun that I'm down for. But I know there's a lot of people out there that disagree with me. So have at it. I think it'll be fine. Another thing, this came up, and I actually have to read this off of the. Let me go through the sheets here. So we had a guy come in on a comment on YouTube, and I had posted a video. Like like a short, like all these social media companies, they want to do these stupid short TikTok like videos, and we've made a few, and I'll do something if it's convenient. I'm of a mind, but I've decided we're kind of a long form content kind of company. It's just not where we're going, and the things we're doing in the future. It's just, I don't think there's a future for us. But anyway, I had posted a video about a let's see here, what is it? About a Cobra, like the MAC-10 subgun. The semi-automatic is the Cobra 9mm, like it's a stamped aluminum box gun from the 70s, whatever. And I published this video a couple years ago. Short video, just kind of making fun. It's just basically saying it's such a terrible gun, but so iconic, from the 80s that, you have to have one. And, we had, on our website, we had done an entire multiple posts because we'd gotten this gun used. Notice the clue. We'd gotten this gun used, and it was pretty obvious to me that most people that own these guns don't know how to crack them open, never really service them. They just maybe lube them a little bit and shoot them, and maybe swab down the barrel from the front end. But they never take these guns apart. And so we took our gun apart, and it has a recoil buffer in it that was falling apart, and it was migrating into the firing pin channel. I didn't know how this thing was even functioning. But we had to replace all this stuff and knock out these pins, and it's kind of a pain in the ass, but it wasn't. You can do it, but it's not like you swap out a spring on like most handguns where you just pull one out, put another one. There's a little bit more to it. So a guy comes in on the video, and he goes, because I'm like, it's a terrible gun, whatever, but it's a tongue-in-cheek video. And he goes, quote, and I'm not going to use your name in case you're listening to this podcast, but I appreciate you being honest. So I'm not throwing you under the bus. I'm not going to use your name. But I thought this was a good learning example for a lot of folks that haven't been around the gun community for a long time, because people will make this mistake every day. It's a logical fallacy. Guy comes in, here's his comment, response to my joking video. I bought mine around 1984. It's been 100% reliable. Not the most accurate, but hell of a lot of fun to shoot, and it always draws a crowd. Reminds me of Miami Vice days. It's like, and his little smiley face, and, it's a cool, I get it. And so I'm like, I'm like doing the guy a favor. And I think I am. I go, have you ever replaced the buffers in yours? Or the original? Have you cracked it open to see their condition? Because, what I said about, we don't think people ever open these guns. And he responds, and he goes, never replaced it. And to be honest, I really should check its condition. I've only brought it out 3 or 4 times and shot maybe 2 or 3 magazines each time. It probably only has around 500 or less rounds through it. So think about this, what he just said. This guy, and so anyway, before I'm not throwing him under the bus, but I said, I understand. Here's some links to our website on, here's what we found with our buffers. Here's where we bought some replacement parts and how we serviced it and got the gun back up and running and put it in a reference collection. But, this went from essentially, I've had mine since 1984, never had a problem with it, and everything's great, to I've only shot it 2 or 3 times in 40 years and only 2 to 3 magazines each time. Well, 2 to 3 magazines is what, 28 rounds? 28 rounds of mag? I mean, this gun doesn't have, if he bought this gun used, it doesn't even have 500 rounds through it. So, you see this all the time. You get guys, and they mean well, and they're not, they're not, they don't realize what they're doing, but sometimes people, especially gun guys, what they will do is they will seek validation for their purchase or their ownership of a piece of equipment, a gun typically. And so if they wrap their ego into the fact they own the gun, I am not of the opinion or of the belief that we own this Cobra gun, that this makes me look like whatever you think of Cobra gun people. We have the gun because we wanted the gun. We have the gun because it's a reference gun. We have the gun because it's a fairly unique gun. It's a cheap gun. And, it represents a certain time in, American firearms manufacturing technology and the industry in whole. It is not a reflection of Marky. It's not a reflection of how I can shoot or if I can shoot or my resume or a lack of resume or anything. It's just the gun. But a lot of dudes, their gun choice is wrapped up in their ego. And it's like if they bought it, it's because it's good or they want it to be good and they don't want someone to shit on their gun. And so what ends up becoming an innocent comment of, we've had this gun since 1984, never had a problem with it. If you burrow down into the facts, it's like, well, have you really shot the gun? No. Most gun people don't shoot. That's the truth. That's why we buy a lot of used guns. It's very hard to find a gun that shot to death. Because most gun guys don't shoot much, and as a result, they can't shoot well. And I'm not like this particular commenter. I'm not capping on you. I'm not criticizing you. I'm talking about in general. But we can't solve the problem until we at least admit, at least honestly, that there is a problem. And I did this for myself many years ago. People have noticed this for a long time if they're around me shooting. when I'm training heavy, doing whatever, I will come up with different systems, but I document every round I fire through a gun. And if someone checks out a gun, I document every round that is fired through that gun. Over under shotguns, tac rifles, precision rifles, pistols, doesn't matter. And sometimes I do it by drills. Sometimes I do it by magazines. Sometimes I do it by boxes. Sometimes I have to remember odd numbers, but I have a little book and I write down all these sometimes I use the Roman numerals or the hash marks, 1, 2, 3, 4 and a hash, that's 5. And then, the odd leftover rounds, I may just count them up individually. But at the end of the day, I log every gun that was shot. I logged those rounds. And the reason I did that was when I was honest with myself about 25 years ago about the amount that I shot, I realized it was about the amount I didn't shoot. And guys will do this. They'll be like, well, I shoot, well, every time I go out, I probably shoot 500 rounds. And if I go out a couple times a year, that's probably over 1,000 rounds a year. I've had that gun for 10 years and I've shot 10,000 rounds with that gun. It's like, and you start logging your rounds and you're honest about how much you shoot. You're like, dude, you're nowhere near. A dude that says he shot 10,000 rounds through a gun, realistically, you're lucky if he shot 1,200. And when you look at all of your guns, and then you look at your skill level and your achievement level, and you start to realize, what does it mean to be a gun guy? Does it mean being good with a gun? Does it mean owning a gun? Does it mean, because you repair guns, because you're a hobbyist? But your definition of being a gun guy might be very different than my definition of a gun guy. And if my definition of a gun guy is someone that shoots, and your definition of a gun guy is someone that's owned the gun since 1984, I don't know if I want to take advice from you as to how well this gun works or what the maintenance cycle is on it if you've only fired it 3 or 4 times in 40 years. Okay, 2 more stories that I thought were pretty interesting in the gun industry, and they're worth mentioning. The first one is, and the more I think about this, I don't, as I'm recording this, I don't know if there's a big backlash against this or not. I don't know what I'm about to say maybe I may be completely tone deaf here. So the CMP program has announced that they are teaming up with Tisas in Turkey. They're the company that's been bringing in all these 1911s. They've got different grades of guns, and we've talked about them somewhat. And like one of the things that they've done here recently is the 2 things that they've done. I think they created a Remington Rand gun, a faithful copy of a Remington Rand gun. I had heard they actually got their measurements from Othias, from seeing Arsenal, on how to do their Remington Rand. So if you ever get a copy of a Remington Rand, or reproduction Remington Rand from Tisas, it will apparently match Othias's gun down to the micrometer level. And the other thing that they did, I guess they had gotten a spec sheet or a layout or a description, maybe even from the Larry Vickers books, of what a kind of like a Delta Force operator's 1911 that was probably specced out in the 80s, maybe to through the maybe the mid 80s into maybe the early 90s, with like this recessed rear sight and some of these other features. They've released a 1911 that they've kind of cut it up to make it look the way that these guns may have looked in the 80s. And I thought that was really interesting. And they're not going to be crazy expensive. And I think, as a matter of fact, now that I remember, I believe Tisas has basically done a clone of the USMC M45, the tan 1911s with the rails that, the real ones go for $8,000 or $10,000 or Lord knows how. You can get one for, I don't know, $700 or maybe $1,200 from Tisas. And, they've been pretty creative in coming out with some stuff. I'm not going to say the Tisas guns are the greatest guns ever. I mean, I'm a semi-custom 1911 guy, but they are there, and it's something if you can get all the features you want and you want to buy one of those as opposed to, say, like a Rock Island Arsenal gun out of the Philippines, I mean, certainly, yeah, why not? I would do that. Well, the thing is, Tisas has announced, CMP has announced, the Civilian Marksmanship Program has announced that Tisas is now going to be making 1911s for the CMP, and they're going to be sold through the CMP. So what is the CMP? The Civilian Marksmanship Program, and then it used to be the DCM, the Designated Civilian Marksmanship Program, and it became the CMP. The CMP is a corporation that exists to promote marksmanship among the general populace. That's why they, you can get guns, surplus guns at decent prices through them. But, most of it's been World War II stuff. And they are running out of 1911s. They were selling a bunch of these, but they can see the writing on the wall. And so what they're going to start doing is they're contracting with Tisas to have, I would imagine, they're 45 caliber guns, GI guns, and you can get, they're going to be marked as U.S. government property. They'll have something on them that does, that it's going to be Tisas roll marks on it, manufacturer marks, but it's going to have approved, kind of government markings on it, and they'll only be available through the CMP, whatever these guns are, these 1911s, because the CMP need a fresh source of 1911s because they're running out of surplus, and they're becoming so expensive too, to be able to keep the program alive and for future generations. Once they run out of guns, I mean, if they don't have a source to fulfill their charter, they're going to go out of business. And so it makes sense that, they may want to, source some stuff from somewhere, and they were able to work out something with Tisas to their satisfaction. Now, if you're kind of like, Turkish gun, whatever, I would assume, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the exact nature of how this is going to work. I don't think the CMP has announced it exactly. I mean, maybe Tisas is sending over parts and maybe they'll assemble the guns, because CMP, they have a spec sheet. Like they break guns apart, they mic them, they replace parts, they know what's in spec and what's not in spec. So, I mean, the CMP has an internal, skill set that they can evaluate 1911s. And so I don't know if, at the very least, I would expect that guns coming in through the CMP from Tisas are going to get broken down and at least mic'd and checked and maybe fluffed and buffed a little bit. And I thought that was, pretty interesting. And they would come with CMP paperwork. And I think it's unbalanced. I think it's a good thing because, a lot of these World War II guns are kind of collectible. And the more I thought about it, an idea popped into my head that will seem sacrilegious to many of you, but I promise you, I feel this way. I personally would love if I could get a USGI formatted 5-inch gun, all steel, through the CMP, with CMP, with all the, the markings that you would want, and the authentic paperwork in 9mm. Yes, I said it. And I think that's interesting. I'd buy that gun. I'd absolutely, a USGI format gun, in 9mm, or, a CMP approved gun that you can shoot, maybe take it to Camp Perry, or wherever they're shooting some of the matches now over there, maybe Camp Atterbury. You don't have to worry about cracking a slide or a frame on something that's kind of collectible. I think this is a good thing. And, down the road, you might even see CMP starting to sell like a CMP upgraded or a CMP endorsed gun. Just how like you've got like Ian McCollum and Carl Casada did the What Would Stoner Do rifle. You can easily in the future, when CMP does, they've got their established with these new guns from Tisas, but you could easily see at some point they decide, what would CMP do? Like it's a CMP 21st century gun. They'd be like, it's got a ledge sight, Novak sights, maybe it's got front cocking serrations, maybe it's high cut under the trigger guard, maybe checkered front strap. Like it could be really interesting what could come out of CMP, and maybe even what they would even allow in some of the competitions, or just the direction. I just think it would, magwells, I just think that would be super interesting. So CMP and Tisas teaming together, especially my understanding is the Tisas guns are forged frames and slides as opposed to some of the other options that are out there. I think that's probably the best deal going. I think Tisas is probably the best choice they could make for the money to keep that program alive. Okay, been going about an hour. Let's go ahead and do the police blotter and call it a night. First thing is out of New York City, of course, and it involves an illegal migrant in the United States in New York City, of course, and it involves the migrants that were caught on film attacking police officers, in the past probably 10 days, 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, whatever it was. Again, I've been busy. I've seen the video, as have all of you. A migrant teen accused of assaulting New York City police officers is arrested again for robbery, because of course he was. So that's the first police blotter. Second police blotter comes out of Mexico, and in the story, I'm just going to give you the basic rundown of the headline, but you gotta, when you go to the website, you gotta see this story. You gotta see who these people are, because I don't begrudge, retired government people making money or being successful, but this, I have questions. And so there's a woman, she's she's listed as a California woman who is originally somehow associated with Chicago. She might have been a real estate agent in Chicago. Maybe she had a license. I don't think she was selling anything. She's married to a former and a retired DEA agent, and she was killed in a crossfire of dopers shooting at each other at this fancy resort in Mexico. And I think that a doper was killed, and I think she was the only other person killed. And they're all saying that she was just caught in the crossfire, like on a beach or something, or somewhere at this resort. And when they start talking about, who this woman is, she's this glamorous woman, boobalicious. She's a woman of a certain age. She's not young. And she's married to this guy, this retired DEA agent. And you're looking at them and you're like, he married well. At the very least, it's like, okay. She's got some name that seems kind of Slavic, and you're like, okay, all right. I know expats and Green Berets, and some people, they work overseas and they end up living overseas. It used to be fairly common down in, Central America and some other places, and it's still common in kind of Mexico. But a DEA agent living in Mexico after retired, I'm like, okay, I don't know if I would, that would be like a gang unit officer moving to South Central after they retire. It's like, that would not be my first choice, but hey, what do I know? And then you read the story, and glamorous influencer woman now, and she's from LA. They apparently have a house in Beverly Hills and are living in Mexico. And the average home price in Beverly Hills is $3.5 million. And I don't know, this story seems weird to me. And I want you to go to the website, and I want you to look at the story, look at the pictures, look at the facts as they're being presented. And I want you to ask yourself this question. Is what you're reading the real story here? Or is this one of the stories where you're like 40% of what they're put in here in this story is either wrong or a mistake or just a fabrication? I don't know. I'm not implying that there is a problem. All I'm saying is I'm reading the story and this seems super crazy weird to me. And Kraken and I have talked about this, and he's like, dude, this seems pretty weird too. And it's like, what do you think? Think it's weird? Okay. And the final police blotter, it's sad and funny at the same time. So this is out of Connecticut. And here's the headline: Methodist Reverend, 63, is arrested for, quote, dealing drugs so he could watch gay porn, unquote. And so he's a Methodist priest reverend wrapped up in some kind of gay drug scheme or whatever's going on. And it's like, it's kind of sad. But one of the European newspapers has now taken it upon themselves to refer to him as the Crystal Methodist. So this wraps up episode 331 of the John 1911 podcast. If you want to see any more stories or pictures and links and stuff like this, please go to the website at john1911.com. That's JOHN1911.com. Remember, it's all about shooting guns and having fun. We're almost done with the building. Everybody, have a good night.